with a tool called Vuex. Before we get too deep into using state management, we'll step back and take a look at when and why do we even need to handle state management. That will answer the question of when we need Vuex. And throughout this module, we'll answer these questions. We'll learn about when it's time to add state management to our app and how to centralize the data. We'll also define what state exactly is and what should go in it and what should not. We'll take a look at how we can fetch data and change the state and update it and manipulate it. And then there's different kinds of rules with managing state, the most important of which is probably how do you communicate with the store or the place that all the state is held in those components. So let's dig in. The place that we hold our state or our data is often called a store. Well, we haven't had one of these yet, and we haven't talked about it much. So let's look at our application before we introduce this, just to get the foundations. Let's open our application and go to the Chapter 9 Begin View Heroes. We'll right-click and open in the terminal. First, we'll run npm install and get everything that we need. Once everything is there, we're going to run the application and take a look at it. We'll run npm run dev to run this. Now let's open our app in the browser. So the application works, and we can select people, and we can change their names, and we can save them if we want to, and go back and change their names back. So everything seems to work, but we don't have this thing called a store yet. So what do we have to get our data? Remember, we've got this heroes component here, and let's just collapse at the top on line 1, all of our template, and we'll take a look down here at where we're getting our data. A good place to start is in created. It's calling load heroes. We then come down to load heroes, and it's calling our data service to get the heroes. Aha! We've done this many times already in this course. We've learned that we use a service, or just another module, to make our HTTP calls, in this case using Axios to get our data. So right now, we just use another module to go get what we need, and we're not sharing data across different components. We just always get it whenever we need it right from the database. So is this good? Is this bad? It's neither. It really depends. In the next section, let's explore how we evaluate this. Now that we've seen our app without a central data store, let's take a look at the problem that a central store might help us with. The first place I like to start is by discussing the types of shared state you might have. State is just data. So where do you share your data in your app? A lot of us have entities in our app. These could be heroes and villains, or customers or orders. Generally, we have a lot of entity type data in our application, and we share that. Then we have session state. Session state is information that is specific to the session that the user is in for your application. So what does that mean? Like user information or preferences they have, or app settings, or maybe the UX state, like where are they in the app, or even the router configuration. This may or may not be stored in a database, but it's important information, and sometimes we share this session state. And then we have local state. For example, we might have a view component that's got class properties or just basic properties or constants inside of it. Now, that state is only shared within the component that it's in, and it's perfectly fine to have constants and properties and other variables in our components. So we'll be talking about how we share entity and session state, and really leaving local state to be our class properties or view component properties. Okay, so how do we share data? JavaScript modules are the simplest approach. We just create a module, and like we had our data service, and we inject what we need into it or import it. So we have something like this, where maybe the shared module is our data service that we've been using. And then we've got a heroes component and a hero detail component that's both sharing that data. In this case, it's sharing a method that goes and gets a list of heroes or gets a single hero. And we can even have that shared module hold on to the heroes after it gets it. So this is pretty easy. We set up our scenario where we've got our data and we share it across components. But it can get out of hand. So what do we do here? We look at the scenario, we've got our heroes being shared by two components. Maybe then we add villains, and that's being shared by two components. And then we can have customer data and orders and products. We have a lot of different places to get data from, and a lot of components use those. Now, I'd even argue at this point, you probably don't need to get any more complex than this. But what happens when now you've got different components needing to access different shared modules? And it probably gets even more of a spider web of a mess than this. In this case, now we've got state that's shared across multiple components, and it's hard to tell where that state actually should be living, especially if it's being hung onto by each shared module. And very likely, even if you're like me, when you create these different shared modules, you might have implemented them a little bit different in each, and then you get inconsistent behavior. Man, that's when you really miss getting back to a single place to go get your state. Or we call this a single source of truth. This is where Vuex can help you. All right, so what is Vuex? Let's take a look at how data flows through Vuex. We'll be hearing a lot of these terms throughout this module, and we'll break them down one by one, so don't worry about that. But first, we've got our components. You already know what these are. This is where we're going to be showing things on the screen. Now, our components are going to dispatch an action. What does that mean? It means that when we want to go get our heroes, we're going to dispatch this action. The action happens to be get my heroes. So we're sending, that's what dispatch means, a message to go off and get our heroes. So where does that action go? Well, it commits a mutation. Mutation means we're changing our state. So maybe at this point we go get our data out of a database perhaps, and then we get that data and we change our state. Our state is basically our single source of truth. That mutates our state or changes it, and then we can get that state back in our component. So we ask for the data, we commit it, we change our state, and then our components always look at the state to see where the data is. Now the actions can talk to a backend API to go get our list of heroes, and if you're wondering what the Vuex store is, it's pretty much everything inside of this dotted line. Vuex handles this whole interaction, so all we have to worry about is the component has to dispatch and then get our state back. Now let's apply this to a real-world example. In our application, our state currently might have these heroes. Here we've got two heroes with abbreviated names, Nathan and Wash. Let's say we wanted to change one of these heroes. Our component wants to update Nathan to Mal. So it sends off or dispatches an action called update the hero, and it passes the hero with it. That hero is called the payload. Then the action will then commit that change. So the first line of code up there is just making a call to perhaps Axios to update the hero on the back end. And then it uses this commit keyword, and we'll learn about that, that commits the change with our mutations. So we get back the updated hero and we update our state. So how does that happen there? That means that the mutations have to come back when the commit is called and actually replace the hero in the state tree. Once that changes, you'll notice the state tree changed to Mal, and then our component can just ask for or get, using a getter or a computed, the heroes out of the state. And that's the circle using Vuex. We dispatch an action, we committed the update to the heroes, we got the updated hero and changed the state, and then, because we had a getter in our component, we get that new hero back. This is what we're going to do together in this module. Step by step, I'll add each of these pieces and watch it grow through the application, running each step along the way. So next up, let's add Vuex to our application. Now it's time to add Vuex to our app. Here's the steps that we're going to follow. First, we're going to add Vuex to the app itself using one of the commands we're going to learn. Then we're going to customize our store. And then we're going to tell the app about the store. So after we create the store, we have to let the app know where it is. And then finally, we're going to tie in the communication between the components to the store. The first step is installing Vuex. And while we can do npm install and then manually wire it up, the easiest way is to use the vue add syntax from the Vue CLI. You can learn more about this from this link here. And you can learn about the Vue CLI from that link. So we're going to add Vuex to the app with vue add Vuex. That'll also wire up some of the relevant code that we need. So what code do we need? Well, remember I said that we have to tell the Vue app about the store. So in the main.js file that we have, you'll notice here, we're importing the store from a store file, and then we tell the Vue app about it right here. These things will get wired up for us when we run this command, vue add Vuex. So what's in that store file? Well, store.js gets generated for us, and it creates the basics and the foundations for our Vuex store. And then we're also going to tell Vue to use it. So we're going to say vue.use Vuex, and that'll connect it with the app. And the store itself gets created with this command here. So what's inside? Well, we're going to learn more about this throughout the rest of the module, but this is where the empty shells of the state, mutations, actions, and getters are. So now it's time to add Vuex to our app. Let's do this together. Back in our app, let's go ahead and open the terminal up inside the 9 Managing State Begin folder. If your app is still running, you want to Control-C out of that. And we're going to run vue add Vuex. This is going to wire Vuex into our application. And it'll show us what different files that it modified to do the trick. So notice our package file has got some changes. We'll go look at that. Inside of here, we should see Vuex right there on line 22. And then the main.js file changed. Now we should be able to click on it down here to go find it. I've got some red squigglies because it didn't put semicolons at the end of the lines. I'm going to press save because my tool is going to add those, or you can add them manually. And notice here on line 10, the store is being wired into Vue. And on line 4, we're importing it from store. So where's store? That's over here. And there is our empty shell of a store. Now I like to set my store up where my state, mutations, and actions are set up in advance, and then I kind of just attach them in. Otherwise, the code gets lengthy. So let's do this together. We'll create a constant called state. And we'll create another constant, mutations. And a const for actions. And we're also going to add one for getters. We're going to learn what all these different things are and wire them up into our Vuex store. And then down here, add state, mutations, actions, and getters, like that. What this allows us to do is now we can define all these different things from line 6 through 9 right up top. And that's going to take some code because we're going to have to wire these up throughout the module. And then at the end, we're just going to put them all into the store in one shot. The last thing we're going to do is I like to put my store in a folder called store because we might have other files. And we'll see why in the next section. So notice we have a store file. I like to create a store folder and put everything inside of there. This will give some more room to add additional files. So I'm creating a folder called store under source. I'm going to drag store under there. VS Code is asking if I should automatically update the imports. And you can say yes or no. We can manually fix this too. I'll say yes in this time, just to show what that did. When I go back to main, now it's saying store store. But I don't really want it to be store store. I'm then going to rename that file to index.js. And then again, it's going to update the imports. So in the end, main.js is still pointing at /store. And then my store has an index in it. Now, if we want to do other things like break these things apart, put state, mutations, actions, and getters in their own files, we could if we wanted to. Now let's make sure everything still works. We'll do npm run dev. We'll run our application, and when it's done, we should be able to click on it and go view our app. Now we haven't actually wired up any of the components to use the store yet, but the app should still work. We'll click down here, and there's our application. So we just connected Vuex to our app. And now, in the next section, we're going to go ahead and wire in the different pieces like state, actions, and mutations. Now that we have Vuex in the app, let's go set up our state. Now, what's the state? That's the data that you want in the store. So in our store.js file, or for us, our store/index.js, we're going to set up an initial state. Our initial data for the app might have heroes and villains. We're going to use heroes as an empty array because when it starts, there's nothing there. But you could have arrays or objects like a user object or whatever you need for your state. Let's go do this together. In our application, let's open up the store/index.js file. That's right here. And notice we've got our state up here. We're going to create a heroes array like that. And by default, it's going to have nothing in it. So on line 7, we're setting our heroes in our state, and then the state gets added on line 14 to the store. Now let's go connect this to the component. So back in views, under heroes view, we currently have data for our heroes. We're going to delete that. Now that data was bound to everything on the page, so we need to replace that. We removed heroes, so we now have to go get heroes from our store's state. Now scroll down, we have a couple other places we're using heroes, like right here in load heroes. We can get rid of that. Now we'll comment this line out because that's a placeholder for we're still going to have to get the state somehow. So first you might think, let's go get it directly. We could do this. Go get the store, and then we can go to state, and then heroes. Like that, and then we could set the local heroes if we had them. but we don't have heroes locally, right? So we can't do this exactly. And this syntax of this.store, $store, that's a keyword we can use with view. That gets us access to the state and then to the heroes. But we can't do that because we don't have a heroes array. We just removed that. So how do we get the heroes state from the store? Well, where do we get things or put computeds and actually get values? The computed section, right? Let's create a heroes computed. And here we can type that same code in and have it return it. So what we had before was we had data.heroes. Remember that array that we just got rid of? We're replacing that with heroes as a computed. We're still going to have something called heroes on the page that we can bind to. Now let's go back to the app, and you might think it's got an error because there's no data. If you look in the developer tools, there's no errors here. Remember, we have our initial state with 0 heroes in it. Let's just add a fake hero just to make things work for a minute. So we just created a single hero in state. Flipping back to our app, notice we have Holly Smith now in the application. Let's go look in the Vuex tools over here. We pull down to View, and now when we click on this second icon, we can switch to Vuex. This icon helps us look at what's going on with the state. If I click on the base state, you'll notice the base state has heroes with an object, and it now has Holly Smith in it, because that was our initial state. Back in our code, let's go look at the component. There's an easier way to write this. We have a heroes computed, which goes and accesses the store state heroes. But there's a special function, and I'll comment that out, called map state. And we're going to use the spread operator to get all these different things out of it. So it's a function that Vuex offers to us that we can use as a convenience. And what state do we want to map out of there? We want to get to the heroes, like this. And it's going to accept a function which has state, and we can say, go get the state's heroes, like that. Now, it doesn't know what map state is because we have to go import that. So let's go back up here, and we'll do import map state. And then from, guess what? Vuex. Now, if we scroll back down, we can see our map state is here. And what we've done is effectively gone from writing this code to saying, now we can access any state we want by simply saying, go get the state called heroes. That's what's happening over here on the far right, and returning that to a local computed called heroes. But there's a lot of hero state, state hero stuff going on here. So there's an even quicker way. I'm going to copy that line again. We'll go to a third way. We could just say, hey, create something called heroes in here and go access the state called heroes, like that. And that'll also work. Let's go check the app to make sure. We refresh, and there's Holly. But guess what? There's an even easier way. So if we comment that one out, because this is the same name both ways, we can actually use a syntax with the array format, like this, to say map the state, go get the thing called heroes, and then create a property locally called heroes, and we're all set. So I walked you through the progression, 4 ways to go, to show you how much easier it is to write this line on 109 than it is to write the ones above it. What should you do? It's up to you. Personally, I prefer line 109 or 108 if you want to be a little more explicit. So flipping back to the app, we refresh, and there's our application. We can see our state is right here. And just to make sure we clean up, let's go remove the initial state, and we've removed Holly. Now this is great for our initial state, but how do we actually get the heroes? Well, that's next. We now have our component pointing to the state, but nothing is filling the state. We need to fire off an action or dispatch an action that's going to get our initial heroes. There's 2 pieces we need to make this work. First, once we have the state, we need to mutate the state to actually add the heroes. Because remember, the only way the store can be changed or mutated is through mutations. These are synchronous operations that modify our state. And they're just functions like this, and they accept in different parameters. The first one being the state itself, which will contain our heroes, and then the payload. That's the second parameter. So imagine we had this function called add hero. We could pass in as a payload the new hero and then push it into the state. Well, what's going to fire off that mutation? This is where we might dispatch an action. So we also define actions, and these can be synchronous or asynchronous. And again, they're just functions. So they can commit 1 or more mutations if we want. This one here on the right is firing add hero, The first argument is the context which Vuex passes us, and we're pulling out just one piece out of there, which is the commit function. So the action is going to accept the hero we want to add. We're then going to call off to our existing data service asynchronously with async await to add the hero. And when it's done, we're going to commit that new hero to a mutation, which is then going to go ahead and write it to our state. Now, these can call other actions they want. They can be synchronous or asynchronous, and we can call these directly from our components or dispatch our actions. Now, if this sounds familiar, it's exactly what we showed in the model earlier in this section. Now let's go set up a dispatch that can fire off our action, which will mutate our state, which will then circle back to the existing link we have in our component to get our heroes. Back in our application, we want to set up our action that we can call. So inside of actions, we're going to write our function. Now to be explicit, I'm going to call mine get heroes action. And then it's going to accept in the context. We only really want the commit out of the context. We can get other things too, like the state and stuff out of there. And that's the only parameter. And then we have to go ahead and make our call out to our database using HTTP, and in this case, Axios, to get our data. Now we already have a data service that does this. So let's not reinvent the wheel. Let's just call our data service. Do data service.getHeroes. Now notice it's complaining about await right here. That's because this action needs that async keyword. And it, of course, wants our data service to be imported. So let's go do that. And once we get our heroes, we want to commit those. So we're going to call that commit. Now we need to call a local mutation here called getHeroes. We're going to pass a string in there. And we're going to pass in the heroes. And you can see it building at the bottom. But where is getHeroes? Well, we need that to be in the mutation. And let's space these out a little bit. So our mutation will have a getHeroes function here. And it's going to have its own parameters. It's going to accept in the state that gets passed, and then the heroes. And all we're going to do is say, okay, go get this state and access the heroes and put all of the new heroes in there. So when we say go get the heroes in this action, what it's actually doing is running off to the data service here on line 19. When it comes back, it's then going to call the commit, which is then going to run this get heroes up on line 12, which will then push the heroes that came from that data service into the state. I don't know about you, but I don't really like this string right here. So what I like to do is over in the store, I'll create a file here called mutation types, and I'll put some constants in there. The first one here is going to be exporting a constant called getHeroes. So we'll use that. We'll come back to our file, and instead of using getHeroes on line 12, we're going to use the property syntax to create the getHeroes there, and we can then replace the commit right there. So why do we do that? Good question. We don't want to make a mistake with the magic strings here. Then, of course, we need to import our getHeroes from the mutation types. Now that's all great, but who's going to call the action? Remember, we need the component to dispatch the action. Right here on line 99, remember we commented out this line. We don't really need it, but that was a placeholder because this is when the app or the user tells the app to go get the heroes. So here's where we want to dispatch it. Now we could say this.store, because we can access the store here, and then we can say dispatch. Then we can do get heroes action like this. And again, we have a string here, which we probably want to use a constant for. Now that dispatch is actually going to be asynchronous in this case, so we might want to do an await there. But there's a better way. So let's keep that there and we'll comment it out. We're going to need this await still, but we can actually use a helper function to get rid of that syntax and cut this down like this. So where does getHeroes action come from? Remember we had a map state here on line 111? Yeah, I knew you would. Well, we're going to add a map actions. It's going to go inside of our methods like this. And inside of there, we're going to add getHeroes action. And we have to take map actions and we're going to import it up here on line 65. So what's map actions doing for us? It's pulling in the actions as methods using the spread operator. It's a helper function from Vuex. So it goes and gets this action here, which came from the store right on line 19. And it's going to add it to a method here, so we can just say, await this getHeroes action. So let's think about that diagram we saw at the beginning of this section. The component says, go get the heroes. Notice line 102 doesn't do anything with them. It's just dispatching the action to go get them. And then what happens in the store is that action goes and gets them, comes back, the mutation commits them, and then once they get into the state, we go back to the component, and the component has this computed, which then accesses the heroes and knows when they've changed. Let's see if it works. Here's our application. We're going to refresh and notice we have all of our original heroes here. And over on the right-hand side, we can see the Vuex store. There's our initial call to the action called Get Heroes. And there's our state with the 4 heroes in it and the payload that was called with that Get Heroes. So now you've had a component dispatch an action, which then handled a mutation to update the state. And then the data came right back around into the component to show on the screen. There could be a whole lot of data inside your state, and sometimes you just want to get one piece of that. This is where getters really come in handy. So getters, frankly, just make it easier to access different parts of the state. For example, I can get one hero out of the heroes array, or I could total a list of orders and prices. Getters are just functions that can summarize or total or just pull pieces of data out that we need. For example, we might have a getter called damage total. Assuming we have a bill in our state, inside there's a bunch of items on the bill. We can then calculate the cost and then return that total. Let's flip over to our app and see where getters can be helpful. We already have our list of heroes that we're getting out of state. And we're using map state here on line 112 to just get the state directly. But when we go to get a single hero, as we do here in hero details, we need to get just the hero by their ID. Now, we don't have something that makes it easy to get that today, but we're going to do that together. So we'll go back into our store over here in index.js, and we can see we've got our heroes up here on line 9, but we want to get just one hero. So inside the getters, let's write some code. We'll call this get hero by ID. Now all getters are going to accept state. So we'll pull that in, and that's going to be a function. We want to have an additional parameter though, and that's going to be the ID. So it's a custom parameter we're going to pass in, and that's going to be the hero's ID, right? And then we're going to say, all right, give me back inside the state everything in the heroes where we find that hero ID matches. So it's just a simple search across the array of heroes to find where is that ID unique, and we bring back that hero by their ID. Now it's already hooked up into our store here on line 32. So we go back into our hero detail and find where are we getting this. Now notice in the async created event, we've got add mode or edit mode here on line 76. This only applies to when we already have a hero and we want to go get it. So we'll modify line 76 to do this. I'll comment that out just so we can see the difference. Now this is not going to be asynchronous because we already have that hero in the state. We could choose to go get that specific one back out of the database if we wanted to, but we already have it in state, so we'll just live with that. And here we're going to call this dot get hero by ID. Now, where is this get hero by ID? That means we have to create a function locally here to do that. And that function is synchronous, and so is the operation above. So up on line 67, we're going to get rid of async on created because it's no longer asynchronous. Now, how did we get state out of heroes? That's where the clue is going to be in how we use a getter. We did map state with heroes. Well, we're going to now have a map getters, just like this. And we're going to add map getters up top. Now with the map getters, we could use the longhand syntax where we say there's an object here. We want to get hero by ID. And it's going to match get hero by ID. But as you might have guessed, we can do the same thing we did over in the view heroes, and instead just say go get hero by ID, and it's going to map that directly to a getter here as it computed. So now line 78 says go talk to get hero by ID, which is going to be a getter right here, and that's going to map to the get hero by ID inside of our getters in our store. So does this work? Let's find out. Here's our data. Let's open up our dev tools. We'll go over to the Vuex tools. Now we'll select Ella, and the data showing up right down here, and everything just works. We actually have a little problem with our code, and it has something to do with something called strict mode. Let's take a look at the problem first, and then we'll explore how strict mode can help us. In our application, we've got Ella right here, and when we select Ella, We can then change Ella's name to something else. And watch what happens when we press cancel. Notice we're going to see a little bit of a blink. It should cancel out Ella's name, but we should also see Ella's name just be Ella on the home page here. Notice for a brief moment, Ella had the other name up on this list. We really don't want that. Well, that's a symptom of the problem. Let's take a deeper look at this. What's happening is our data is actually changing in the state when we type in the form, and we don't want that. We don't want people to be editing the form and update the state until they're ready to do so. And we're not ready. Let's flip back over to our code. Let's add strict mode here to the Vuex store. This is a setting which is a little expensive to run, so we only want to do it when we're not in production. But it's going to basically check to make sure we're not mutating the state directly. The only thing that should be doing that is a mutation. So we'll enable strict mode whenever the process is production. Let's go back to our application and we'll refresh. Now let's select Ella and we'll change Ella's name again to something else. And as soon as we modify it here, notice what's happening. We're getting an error now. So in strict mode, it's basically saying do not mutate the Vuex store state outside of the mutation handlers. Did we create a mutation handler to update the first name or the last name? No, we didn't. Right now we should just be getting it. So let's go look at what the problem is here. So strict mode alerted us of the problem. Now let's go back into the hero detail. Notice here on line 78, we're getting a reference to the hero right out of the store. What we really want to do is clone it. Now we could do a shallow clone using the spread operator like this and putting it back into another object, but that doesn't really work if you've got nested properties and objects in there. So we're going to undo this. And instead, we're going to use Lodash's clone deep function. Let's come back down to the terminal. We'll drag this up just a little bit. And I'm going to use a split terminal by hitting this icon over here on the far right. Run npm install Lodash. If you're not familiar with Lodash, you can definitely check this out. It's a great library of different functions that kind of extend the JavaScript language. So it's going to help us take the hero object in this case and make a clone of it. So we don't have a direct reference and we will not be updating the state directly. It's basically a copy. So then once we have Lodash, we can come back up to our code up here and we can import it. And the function we want out of Lodash is clone deep. Now we're not using clone deep yet, which is why it's red. We can come back down here and now we can clone this hero just like that. Now, sometimes when I add new libraries, I like to cancel out the terminal. And I hit Control-C there to do that, and then run npm run dev again, just to make sure all the file changes have got picked up. So let's just do that just to be safe. We'll flip back over to our app and we will refresh. We'll go back to the main heroes menu first. We'll select Ella. Let's change Ella here. Notice there's no error now over on this side. Now when I hit cancel, we shouldn't see a blink either, because it should just get rid of that value. The only place this value is on this page because we cloned it. And notice there was no blinking on this time. So what did we do? We made sure that our application is not mutating state directly. The only way we should mutate the state is if we go through that cycle that we've been talking about, where we dispatch an action and then the mutation occurs to the state so we can get our state back out. We've made good progress. We have our Vuex store working so we can get the list of heroes or get a single hero. But now it's time to mutate the state for updates, inserts, and deletes. Let's take a look at how we can do that. We'll flip back to our code, and here in the index.js, which is our store, we can see we have one mutation already for get heroes. Now we're going to create them for add, update, and delete. So let's go into the mutation types first. We'll make 4 of these, and we're going to have one for add heroes. It's actually add hero, like that. And then we'll also have one for update hero, and then delete hero. So now we have our constants. We'll flip back over to index.js, and we'll start using those here. Let's start with the add hero. Now we know mutations are going to get state and then a payload. In this case, the payload is going to be a single hero that we're going to add. Now what do we do to the state tree when we get a hero? Well, we can get into the state. We know it has a heroes array, and then we can push that new hero into there. Now we'll add the new hero into the state tree. So we've mutated the tree. Let's go ahead and do a delete. Again, we'll get the state, and we're going to delete a hero, so we have our hero. So how do we get rid of a hero? There's a couple ways. We know we're going to modify the heroes here. I'm actually going to do is find that hero first. So I'm going to go into state, heroes. I'm going to use the filter function. And it's going to get each hero and iterate over those. And then we're going to look for the ID where it does not match the hero ID here. So that's going to give us back an array of every hero except the one that we pass in. And then I'm going to make a new array out of this using the spread operator, like that. And there are many ways that we can delete, so this is just one option. Now, update's a little different because we have to find the one that we have and then just replace that one. So again, we'll get state and then our payload for hero. Now, first we have to find that hero inside of our array. We're going to find the index of it. So I'm going to find like this. I'm going to say, give me a constant called index, go into the state tree, find the heroes, find the index, and we're going to find it where it matches the hero ID. So now we know where that hero ID is. We're going to use the JavaScript splice function to go replace it. So I'm going to go into the state tree again, and we're going to do splice. I'm going to pass the index, and for one element, we're going to replace that one with the hero that we pass in. We just did an edit in place of the array. We could make a whole new array if we wanted to. So another option here is we could go into the state and set the heroes and basically spread out those heroes, copy each individual hero object and make a new array. So this way we're making a brand new array. That's up to you how you want to do that. With Vuex, you can mutate the state directly. You don't have to replace the state each time. But so far, we've been able to set up our mutations for getting, adding, deleting, and updating. And as I said, there are different ways that you can write this code. The logic is up to you. But now that we have a way to mutate the state, we need to call that from our components. And to call it from the components, remember our diagram, we often like to dispatch an action to do that. So let's set up the actions next. Next on our list is to set up the actions so we can call and dispatch those actions from our components. Let's go back to our code, and we see we have our mutations here. And we've imported those mutation types up at the top here on lines 4 through 9. We did that so we could reuse the exact names. So in our actions, let's create the add, update, and delete. Now these will be asynchronous, so we'll set this up. Now we get the context as our object here, but if we do context and we then take the payload in as our hero, anytime we want to talk to the commit function, we have to do context.commit. Now we can do that, but we can make a shortcut. So instead of context, we really just want to get the commit value out and use that. So we'll pull commit out, and then we can just talk to commit directly. Now the great thing about these actions is because we already set up our data service to go use Axios to add, update, and delete, we already have written this code basically. So first, we're going to make that asynchronous operation to go add a hero. Now once we await that response, we have the added hero. Now we can just call the commit function, which is a feature of Vuex, which calls the mutation. So we first give it the parameter of what mutation do you want to call. I want to call add hero. And again, that's why we created the constant, makes it easy. And we're going to pass to it the payload of added hero. Now let's create our asynchronous delete hero. Let's call our data service to delete the hero. And it's going to return back the deleted hero's ID. If you don't remember this, we can go back and look inside the shared folder at our data service. And let's find our delete hero. And notice here on line 64, we're returning the hero ID that we're going to delete. So why do we need to know this? Because once we delete the hero in the database, we want to update the store. We have to mutate it. So we're going to call commit, and we're going to pass in the delete hero. That's going to be the mutation name, and then the deleted hero ID. So this line 45 is going to call line 24, the delete hero. And our add hero action here on line 41 is going to commit, which is then going to call into line 21 up here in the mutation. And our final one's to do the update. Now I'm going to put a couple lines of space in here so we can see how some of the snippets can help us with this. If we hit V mutation, you're going to see there's a V mutation snippet. You can see it over on the right-hand side. If we hit V action, you're going to see an action snippet as well. Now it creates the entire action object, but it also shows you that you can have a name like update value, and it shows you how to get the commit and the payload. So if you forget the syntax, you can use that. We're going to type in the update hero. And update hero is going to call our same data service update hero function. And then we're just going to commit the mutation. Now you may notice that these actions are all pretty simple. They're asynchronous in behavior at this point because we wanted them to be so. We want to go out and hit a database, get our data, update our data, delete our data, do what we need to do, and then we're going to commit those changes through the mutations to the state. But we could make multiple calls if we want to multiple backends. A lot of asynchronous operations. We could actually commit multiple mutations if we want to. So the actions are a great way to kind of group these kind of different mutations and operations together. One last piece up here. With the actions, what else do you get besides commit in the context? That's a good question. So the actions are going to let us get to different things. First, we can access the state through there if we wanted to. Second, we can get to the getters. Third, we can get to commit. We've seen that already. And fourth, we can dispatch. Ooh, what's dispatch doing? And you might have guessed this, but yes, you can actually dispatch other actions from one action. So for example, if you wanted to call the get heroes action from the add hero action, yeah, you can do that. Now that we have our actions and our mutations all set up, the next step is to connect these to the component. Let's go take a look at how we do that. We now have our actions and mutations to modify the state tree, but we need to dispatch the actions from our components. Let's go do that together. So we need to dispatch these actions. Now let's go back into Heroes View. And one hint here is basically look for any place we were using the data service. Right here in line 94, we're doing data service delete hero. Now we're going to comment that out. Instead, we're going to fire off an action. So we want to call our action, which is going to be this delete hero action. We'll pass it the same parameter we did in the line above, which is the hero to delete. We go back into our store and we can see right here in line 45, there is our asynchronous operation to delete the hero. If we want to wait for that to actually finish, we can type await right here. But how do we actually get that action? Because we can't just talk to it directly, right? Well, we could say this.store and then do dispatch, because remember we can just dispatch our action, then the name of the action, which is delete hero action, and then pass it our this hero to delete. But there's a shortcut, which we've learned many times, and that's why we're doing this right there. We just want to call it directly. So these mapping functions are great. Remember we used map actions to get the get heroes action. Well, we can do the same thing to get the delete hero action. So now we can call this delete hero action directly. Once we do this, if we go back up, data server should be red because nobody is using it. Right there it says it's defined but never used. Well, we can delete that line of code. Now our heroes component is completely using the store to get the heroes and then to delete a single hero. We also have the hero detail. Let's find where data service is being used here. There's the lines for updating and adding a hero. So let's delete the import up top. We know we're going to need some actions in here. So how do we get those? We just type in map actions up there. We go back to find wherever we had the data service. We can delete that line of code. And these two down here are going to have to be changed. Let's go back to our store and look at the name of the actions we want. There's add hero action and update hero action. So back in our methods, we need to map those. So let's map those actions. Now that's going to add two methods locally here in this component called add hero action and update hero action. Now we don't have the data service anymore, so instead it's going to be this update hero action and this add hero action. Now, do I always suffix my actions with the word action? Actually, I don't do that, but I'm doing it here so it's very clear the difference between the mutations and the actions, just so we can see that. What would I do? I would just call it add hero or update hero. But just to be super clear, we're putting action on here for this course. Now the data service should no longer be in this file. We're not importing it, so we're good. Now let's go run the app and see if everything's working the way it should be. We'll refresh the app. There's no errors in the console. That's a good sign. First, we can see our state is changing over here. We'll just make some more room so we can see it all side by side. And then when I delete Ella, we'll say yes. We should see the action called delete hero was fired. The payload was 10. That should be the ID for Ella. The state tree looked like this. And then when I got back to get heroes, because it refreshed, now the state is missing one of those. So when I select Madeline, we scroll down, we can change Madeline to Colleen. When we press save here, we saw the update fired and then the get heroes. So we can actually walk through the state. Notice here we've got get heroes. That was all of them. We deleted the hero. Then we re-got them, and now we have the one without Ella. Then we updated. We changed Madeline to Colleen, and then we got our heroes. What about adding one? We'll press the add button here. We'll add one called John. Now we can see the add hero. And in the end, we can walk through all the state and see what's happening. So now our current state shows the fourth hero is John. So now we have connected our heroes and hero details components to fire off the dispatching of the actions, which then fires off the mutations and commits those to the state. And then we get the data back through state and getters into our components. Ultimately, we now have a single source of truth for where all the state is. Throughout this course, we've created all the heroes that we can take a look at and build up our Vue app. But there's a final project inside your example code, and that shows heroes and villains. Let's take a look at that because it also helps exemplify how we can use the store for more than one type of state. We flip back to our code, and we're going to close all of our windows, stop our processes, and now we're going to open up xxFinal, right-click on Vue Heroes, open in Terminal. We'll run npm install or npm I to get all of our packages. Then when it's ready, we'll run npm run dev. And this will run the application. So before we look at the running app, let's look at the big differences here. In the final app, we have everything we've built up to here, but we also have villains. So in our mutation types, we not only have our heroes, but we have our villains here. And of course, over in the store, we're importing those, lines 6 through 13. Notice our state now has heroes and villains, so the initial state is set to an empty array for both of those. Then we have our mutations for all of our heroes, and then for our villains. And then we have our actions for the heroes, and then of course for the villains. And of course we have components that we use too. We'll open this up in the browser and we'll refresh. Now we can see our heroes and our villains. We'll open up the developer tools and then go to the Vue dev tools over here. We'll close the console, we can see what's happening. We'll look at the Vuex tools. We can see our base state here. And then once we get the villains, we can see we have 9 of them. We can scroll through those. We can select Simon right here. And if we want to, we can update Simon's record, pressing save. So you can see we have the full Vuex features for our application for both heroes and the villains now. This just gives you an idea of how you can combine multiple pieces of state inside the same store. I encourage you to look at this final solution as the final state of the application so you can use that as a reference. So here's what we learned. We saw how we can start with our initial state, and then our components, by mapping the state, can get that state and show it on the screen. And then when we want to dispatch an action to update a hero, we dispatch it past the hero. That action then will then go update it in the database and fire off the commit, which actually fires off the mutation. And the mutation then replaces that hero inside the state, which then, because we're actually accessing the state through map state or getters back in the components, we get to see that on screen. So what did we learn exactly? We learned how to add Vuex with the Vue CLI to our application. We then learned how to create our initial state and then how to update that state or modify it by dispatching actions that then commit the mutations. And then finally, we learned how to use the different map functions like map actions and map state to communicate from our components to the store. And just to summarize what we started out with in this chapter, Vuex is not for every app, but if your state is shared, Vuex can really help. And as you can see, I'm a big fan of recommending the mapper functions to reduce your code complexity. And if you need to look up any other details about Vuex, there's a great set of docs online. Now, thank you for coming along on this journey with me of Vue getting started. It's time to get started learning Vue. Now, before we begin, you probably have some questions. I know I did when I started with Vue. First, how easy is it for you to get started? We're going to dive right into that in just a moment. What tools are you going to need and why do you need them? Like, what are they doing for you? We'll explore that as well. And then finally, what resources are you going to need, both for this course and then beyond when you're still doing Vue development? Well, there's no better way to start our Vue journey than just diving right in. Let's take a look at what that looks like. Let's find out how easy it is to get started with Vue. We're going to do these things together, but what are we going to do? Well, we're going to build a simple Vue application and we're going to get Vue from a content delivery network or a CDN. We're going to build some HTML in the page. We're going to create an instance of Vue. That's so we can interact with Vue's features. And then we're going to have some data or a model, and we're going to bind it from Vue to the HTML page. So the next step is for us to go do this together. Open up your favorite code editor. I happen to like using Visual Studio Code. And just go to an empty folder somewhere. And then inside of that folder, create a new file. I'm going to call mine index.html. And now we're going to put the HTML on our page. And once we type HTML, if we select the second one where it says HTML:5, this is built into VS Code, and then we hit tab, it'll automatically create the HTML for us. This is just the basic HTML for a page. And you can just tab through that to get to the bottom. Now we have a body. The next step is to go get Vue. So up inside of our heading, and I'll just put a script tag right here, and I'll create a source, and we're going to go to a CDN to get Vue. Now here we're going to do HTTPS, because that's going to be secure. We're going to go to the CDN at jsdeliver.net, and then we're going to do npm/vue like this. And yeah, I know that's not how you spell deliver, but that's the link. And if you want to try that, you can copy and paste it, or just hover over it and click, as the editor tells you, and there you can see there's the Vue library. Now let's put something in the page so we can render some content. We're going to create a div here, and we're going to give it an ID of app. Well, the ID is there so we can identify where in the application Vue will be. Then we'll create an input of type text, and then below that, we're going to create a p tag for paragraph, and we're going to say hello. Now I want it to print here hello, then whatever your name is, like John, whatever they type in the input box. Now we need a way to create the Vue instance. So we're going to create a script tag at the bottom of our body here. And we're going to create a new instance of the Vue object. And we're going to pass to it a parameter, which is also an object. And the first property of that object is element, or EL. And here we're going to tell it where is our Vue object. Well, it's the app ID on line 11. That tells the Vue instance where to find our page. Next, we need our data model. So I'm going to create a data function. And then inside of there, we're going to return an object. This is our data model, and I wanted to have a name. And I'm going to default mine to the value of John. I'm going to bind this up to the input using a thing called a vModel. This effectively binds the value from our data up into the input. And then we want to say hello. So we're going to do that right here with interpolation or double curly braces. When you're done, you can press Save to save the document, or what I like in VS Code is I go up to File and check off the autosave. Then I don't have to worry about did I save the file or not. Next, we need to serve our page and see if it works. So I'm going to reveal it in Finder. You could also do that to Explorer on Windows. And then I'm going to just double click on this file. And there you can see it's rendered at my page. I'll zoom in a little. It says John by default. And if I type into here, I could say Mary or Ella Lee. Congratulations, we just wrote our first Vue application together. The second question we had was what tools do we need and why? Let's take a look at these. First, you're going to want to get Node.js and the Vue CLI. Now you can go to this link here at nodejs.org to get Node, download it, and install it. Make sure you're getting the LTS version for your operating system that you are using. Once Node's installed, you can then install the Vue CLI with this command here. Now if you're wondering what the LTS version is, that represents long-term support. When you go to the Node.js website, just make sure the version you get has LTS next to it. Once you download and install these, you can verify your installation by running these commands. Vue-version, which currently at the time of the recording is 3.7. Verify that you've got the latest version, then you can do node-version. Now, right now, the current minimum for Vue is 8.9, but always check the Vue docs, which is from this link right here, to see what the lowest supported version is. And then npm-version to make sure you've got the latest version of npm for what we need. So why do you want to use the Vue CLI? Well, good question. Do any of these things interest you? Like Sass or Jest or Babel or PWAs or Nightwatch or Modern Mode or TypeScript? Do you even know what all these things are? And how are you going to put them all together in your Vue app and make sure they all work? Well, the Vue CLI does all that for us. So we're going to use that in this course. And if you want to learn more about the Vue CLI itself, you can check out this Pluralsight course that I authored called Developing Faster with the Vue CLI. So the Vue CLI is one tool we need, but there's some others, and we've already seen some of these. Visual Studio Code is my editor of choice, and I highly recommend it. Inside of this editor, there's two main extensions I really recommend for VS Code with Vue. The first one is called Viter. That gives you basically language services inside of VS Code, so VS Code knows what Vue files are. And then a Vue snippets extension, which is really cool for just writing a lot of the syntax for us. And then once we actually render our pages inside the browser, there's a developer tool browser extension that I highly recommend from the Vue team. And where can you get these? Well, that's a good question. You can go to this link here to get VS Code. These two links here for Viter and the Vue snippets. And then you go to this link to get all the Vue developer tools that you want. Once you have the Vue CLI, these are the commands that you might run, like Vue create and the name of your app, hello world, and then -d. -d actually just says use all the defaults. Don't prompt them with a bunch of questions. If you take the -d off, it'll ask you a bunch of things like, do you want routing or not? And then once it exists, you can use cd hello world to go into that folder. Then you can run the application with npm run serve. We'll be doing this quite a bit throughout the course. Let's take a run through of some of these tools now. Now let's get familiar with the Vue CLI. We'll go back to VS Code or Visual Studio Code, and I'm on a Mac, so I'm going to hit Command-Shift-P. On Windows, you can hit Control-Shift-P to bring up the command palette. Then we're going to type in Create New Terminal. And here we can see that we can now create a new terminal inside of VS Code, right here. Now I want to use the Vue CLI. First, I'm going to do Vue-version, just to make sure I have the right version of Vue. Then we're going to run Vue create, and we'll call it Hello Vue, with a -d for default. Now this is going to create a Hello Vue application, and you can see it's going through the process right now, and it didn't ask us any questions. So it's basically going to do all the defaults out of Vue. You may get a question like this saying, hey, there's too many files to actually track for Git changes. Would you like to add node modules to gitignore? If it asks you that, you can just say yes. So now in the gitignore, you'll notice it's ignoring all of our node modules. That means it's not going to track that folder for any Git changes we have. And it set up the Git changes for us with the Vue CLI. So now let's cd into Hello Vue. And then we want to be in that folder. Notice we're actually in the folder above HelloView. So let's open that folder by going to File, Open, and then we'll go into my Play folder, and there's HelloView. That way we're just looking at the HelloView folder itself. And then here we can see there's our package.json. It installs some dependencies here for Vue and Core.js. There's our command to serve that we talked about previously. So let's run that command. We'll go back and create a new terminal integrated right down here. We'll run npm run serve. Now it's building our Vue application. This is our default application that we created. And then once it's done, we can just click on the link right here. And now you've just browsed to the first Vue application you've created with the Vue CLI. Remember, we were going to ask ourselves 3 questions, the third of which is, what resources will you need? Well, let's go figure that out now by getting and exploring the sample code for this entire course. We'll do this together. Now you'll want to open a browser and go to this address, github.com/johnpapa/vue-getting-started. Once you go there, you should see this repository with a bunch of folders for chapters, and then some instructions. We're going to follow these instructions here. First, we're going to type this command or just copy it by triple clicking, and we're going to go back to our VS Code editor. Now we're going to find a folder we want to put this. I don't recommend putting it in the Hello View, so let's go back in this case to the Play folder, or you can put it anywhere you'd like. Then I'm going to paste that command in. So now we're going to clone that repository of all the samples. This should just take a moment. Let's go back to the web page real quick, and now it says cd into that folder. So I can type that in, hit enter. Now if I list out those files, you can see them here. All the code is now local. Let's flip back over to the browser. Now it wants us to change to a folder that we want to use. Remember, every folder in here, like to getting started, because that's the module we're in, so each folder represents a module that we're working with. Here we're going to go into the second folder called to getting started, and each one has a begin and an end. In this case, there was no begin because we had no code, but now we do at the end, and then Vue heroes. So we can cd into that, or back in VS Code, we can hit Command O, or go up to File and choose Open. And we can go into our folder, Vue getting started, look for number 2, and then end right here. Then we'll go into the Vue heroes. That's the project we're going to be using throughout the entire course. And then it should refresh with a Vue project. We'll flip back to our browser, and next it says install the npm packages. We'll do that here. We'll open up an integrated terminal. We'll hit npm install. It'll go out and install the same packages that we had before for our Vue Hello World. And then for the final step, we'll flip back to the browser. It says run npm run serve. That's to run the app. So we'll write npm run serve and hit enter. And it starts up our development server, and then once it's done, we can then click on this link here, and there we go. Now you'll notice that the basic app has a little bit of styling to it. It says there's a tour of heroes. That's the name of our app, because we're going to be dealing with an app with heroes and villains. And we're going to start right here. You can always click the links in the upper right-hand corner for either contacting me through Twitter. That'll open up in Twitter and you can reach out to me. Or you can click this link here to get back to the GitHub repository. But flipping back to our code, let's take a look at what's inside of our code base. And now I'm going to hit the trash can over here to kill the terminal, so it stops running. Now we can see we've got a source folder with components in it. There's our header bar. That's basically what shows you the tour of heroes at the top of the links. And then we have the app view, which is the main component where it says we'll start here. This is the starting point for the entire course, and now you have all the code that you need. And if you want to go to another folder later, you can just go back in, and then we can change the folder that we're in, and we can look at different chapters. You'll notice here inside of chapter 3, there's a begin and an end, and you'll see those as we progress through the course. So how does a Vue app start? Let's take a moment to understand this. The application itself, we run through these scripts in the package.json, like npm run serve or build or lint. Now what happens when we run npm run serve? Well, that runs the application. Well, what if we run npm run build? That's going to run a production build process, and it's going to put the files in a folder called dist right up here. And then it creates this index.html, which is also just minified quite a bit, and it launches and loads when we serve it. Well, the first thing that runs is inside the source folder, and it's the main file right here. I find it helpful to follow the process of how we crank up the app. First, here inside of main.js, we see new view. It's creating a new instance of view, which we did a few minutes ago in the simple app. And now it's taking this app thing, which is the app component, we'll look at that in a moment, and it's mounting it to this ID, which is a div in the index.html called app. Now, where's that index.html? The public folder contains assets that will be distributed. So here is the index.html, and there is the app on line 23. Notice we don't serve from public. Those files get copied to dist later. So dist is what you're actually going to distribute. Now let's go back into main.js. Now where is that app component? That's this app.view right here. We can see inside of here in the template, that's our HTML content. There's this div called app, and then there's our header bar. That's another component. We'll look at that in just a moment too. And then some more HTML. So that header bar component, we pulled that in from this components folder. And notice when we use that, we have to tell it in the script that this component here depends upon that other component. So then we follow that, and it goes into components here. There's header bar view. Now here's our header bar. It's got a nav inside of it, and it also has other components embedded in it. So now you're seeing how a component tree can be built. And those are also pulled in from the components folder. Now let's say that our header bar needed to have some styling to it. What could we do? Well, let's close the bottom here so we can see a little bit more real estate on the screen. We notice we have this template, and then we have the script. There's a third thing we could have, and that is style. So we could create style with Sass or CSS or less or stylus. We'll create our style here with SCSS, and it's scoped. What does that mean? Well, it means if I have a class here, or we can call this class anything, and it's maybe got a color, that means this style is scoped to this component here, in this part of the component tree. If we remove scoped, that means that this class is no longer scoped to this component and that the entire application can see it. So why is this important? Because sometimes you develop a component and you only want your styles to apply to it or its children. Now you'll notice back in app view component, there is a style at the bottom, and it is importing files from another place. This is where we're getting the design for our application. So if we look in the design folder, there are a series of files here that are importing Bulma, which is a CSS design language, which is pulled in from up here. Also some variables, so we can have styles and colors, like that's where the green color comes from. And then the styles themselves, which actually styles the actual app. So what we're doing here in the app component is we're pulling in all the styles so the entire application has access to them. This is good for anything that's site-wide. Anything you want to scope to a component, you just put inside of each individual component and you use this scoped keyword. Now you've seen the basic design for all the code that you're going to see in this course, which will prepare you to be able to extend it in the future modules. Now that we have and explored the sample code, we've answered our 3 questions. Now you might have one more. I get this question a lot about what theme am I using for VS Code. This is entirely optional, but I use one called Winter is Coming. I created it, and if you want to use that same theme so your editor looks like mine, you can download it from this link here. Well, now let's reflect on what we've done throughout this module. At this point, you've installed and verified all of your tools. And you've created your first 2 Vue apps. The first one was a simple Vue app off of the CDN, and the second one was with the Vue CLI. And we learned how to run commands like npm run serve to run our Vue applications using the CLI. We learned about our GitHub resources and a bunch of tooling that we can use for VS Code. And of course, we got the sample code. Well, now you've got everything that you need to proceed with the course. In our next chapter, we'll learn about data binding. Our sample application is all about heroes and villains. In this module, we're going to learn how to display those heroes and respond to events on the page. The mechanism that helps us with this is data bindings and event handlers. So we're going to learn how we can display data, and then also how we can allow the user to edit the data. And of course, we need to be able to make changes in the UI based upon different data aspects as well. So we'll bind to properties in the HTML. And we're going to learn how we can handle user interactions, things like clicks of a button. So let's get started. Let's begin by learning how we can bind to properties in components. Inside of the header bar links view component inside of our sample, we're going to dive in a moment and bind to an HTML property. Here's the sample code. Notice we have an anchor tag up here with an href. And then we see this interesting syntax of v-bind. Anytime we see v-, that is a directive that Vue owns. So here it's a Vue binding to this href property. And then it's binding to a model property called GitHub. So GitHub would be a variable that holds the value for the URL. Now there's a shortcut syntax where we just say colon. Anytime we see colon and then a property like colon href, it's then also going to do the same thing that vbind does. And that's the shortcut. Now that we know how to do data binding, we're going to jump into the code and do this ourselves. Inside of our code, we can see we've got 3 data and events in a folder, and then begin and then view heroes. If you right-click on View Heroes, you can choose Open in Terminal. And down here now, we can start doing things like listing out the files, or npm install, or npm I for short. We'll need to do this so we can actually run the application. Once this is done, we can then run npm run serve. And then it builds the application, and then we can take a look and see what that beginning state is. We can click on the link right here, and there's the beginning state of the app. You'll notice we have this heroes page that has an ID, first name, last name, description, and some other properties. We also have a header bar up top. Now if we make this go full screen, we can see there's 2 links over here. We want those links to go to certain addresses. So let's go explore our code. Now we've got this View Heroes folder, and inside of there you'll notice we have a source folder. The source folder is where our source code goes, and then inside of components we have some different components. Now out of the box, we have this header bar links. Remember I said we were going to come back to this. Now I can hit Command-J now to close down the bottom bar. Just give some more space. And notice we have this href right here for the GitHub link. Well, we don't really want to use that. Maybe we want to make that a variable. So I'm going to copy that out. I'm actually going to cut it. I'm going to do colon href. I'm going to give it a variable here called GitHub. And then I'm going to come down to the bottom of the template. And here I'm going to create a script tag. And then we're going to define our component. Now our component's going to have a name. We'll call this header bar links. And then we're going to use a snippet. Remember we installed these earlier with VS Code. And the snippet is vdata. And I'm going to hit tab. And it's going to show me how to create the data model for my properties here. Now we wanted to have one called GitHub, remember. I'm going to delete the value, open up a quotation, and then paste in that URL we needed. And then I'll press save. Now once I have that, now this model called GitHub is now bound to the GitHub href right up here. We have a second link as well right here. There's a link to a Twitter URL. So I'm going to make a model here called Twitter. And don't forget to put the colon in front of href. Come down, go to the end of GitHub. We're going to type in Twitter. And we'll paste it in. Now if we look at this again, remember we could have done up here v-bind. And that would have been fine. v-bind colon href to GitHub. But you can see it's much shorter just to type colon href, and that's really what most people do. Now if we look, our application's still running down here in the terminal. I hit Command-J to open that. If I go back to the browser and I refresh this page, now if I go full screen and we click up here, you can see in the bottom left-hand corner, there's the URL. If I click on that, it'll open up the GitHub page. And if I click on the Twitter icon, it would do the same thing. It'll open up in Twitter to my profile. So what else might you want to bind to? Well, here we can see an anchor tag. We've got an href we can bind to. You might want to bind to a class. We'll see that a little later in this module. Or maybe you've got an image tag and you want to bind to the src property, the source. All these are valid scenarios. And now you know how to do data binding with the vbind or the colon. And now you can apply that to your own applications. Now that we've had a taste of data binding, let's learn how we can display text inside of our Heroes page. We're going to open up the Heroes View component in just a moment. Inside of there, we're going to display different properties from our models using this thing called interpolation. Now we use those with double curly braces. So over here on the left, you can see we've got hello and then name. Name is a variable in our model. And then we just surround this with the double curly brackets. So that's interpolation. Now we can also use v-text, so we can bind to something as well. But again, the most common thing we'll see is going to be the double braces. Now down below, we're going to see this component, and it's going to have a data model in there. We just saw that a minute ago when we created it for the header bar links. The data model is an important part of the component because it's where our data lives. And the data model comes from a data function. Notice it's a function, and it returns an object, which in this case has one property called name, and name is set to John. So the data function identifies those models. Now let's jump into our application, and we'll add some interpolation to our Heroes component. Back in our app, it's still running, and if it's not, go ahead and run npm run serve. We'll open the component. We can see Heroes View. Now I want to make some more space here. The bottom panel is called the panel, and I can hit Command-Shift-P or Control-Shift-P and toggle the panel, but notice it's also Command-J up top. Now I want to get rid of the sidebar as well to make some space. So I can say toggle and then sidebar. It's also just Command-B. Now our component's got a lot of HTML in it. So what's all this HTML doing? Let's flip back to our running application inside of Chrome. Notice here we've got an ID. We're not displaying it right now. And we also have a title bar. I want to display the title right there. And then I also want to put a message down at the bottom in this blue area. So those are three things that are read-only we want to display. Back in our code, if we look for title, we can see there's a couple places for it. There's the title of the page. Then there's the header bar title. We want to place inside of this header bar title a title for the page. Now, what do we want to put here? We could put a model that's just called title, but we actually want to put the hero's first name. So let's leave it there for a place marker. We'll just put a to do. Now let's come down to the bottom. Remember, we've got this default component here, but we want to use that snippet again to create the data. So we hit vdata and then just tab, and here we go. The first property I want to create is going to be called our hero. Now our hero is going to be an object, and the hero is going to have some properties. So we'll set some properties up like the ID of 20. First name, this will be Madeline as our first hero. We'll do last name of Papa. Now each hero needs a description, and heroes might have a cape color. We'll default this to blank. They also might have some kind of a superpower, so we'll make power be blank by default. And then are they retired or active? This hero is active right now. Now the hero is not the only object in our data model. We want another property called message, and we'll default that to blank as well. So now that we've got these different properties, I want to display the first name of our hero up in the title bar. So it'll be hero.firstname. So you go back to the top, our to-do was, we can now type in hero first name right there. Now the next thing we want to display is going to be the ID. So if we scroll down just a little bit, you'll see this label here, it's read-only of the ID on line 16. So we're going to do hero.id. Now before we go any further, we can see we're using interpolation to display the hero's first name and the ID. Now case matters here, so make sure you use the same casing you used in the model. And if we flip over to the running application, we can see Madeline and then 20 as the ID. Now we don't have anything in the message right now, but we still want to bind it there. So let's go back and find the message at the bottom. You'll see this div for notification, and I'm going to put in message right here. And when I come back to the app, nothing shows up. That's because message is blank. So if we just want to test this out, we can do test right here, come back to the app, and as soon as it refreshes, we see test show up in the bottom. Now hold on. You might be wondering how it's reloading the application for us on the fly. That's because the app is still running, and because we ran npm run serve in our terminal, it's actually looking at the files, and as they change and as we save them, because we have autosave on in Visual Studio Code, when those changes got made, it automatically rebuilt the app and then sent those changes to the browser. Perfect. And now you've learned how to use a data model and then bind that using interpolation in your HTML. Now let's see how we can capture user events inside of our view component. So inside the Heroes View component, we want to capture when some event occurs, like a click on a button. The way we do that is with the syntax using v-on colon, that's the directive, then the name of the event, like click, and then the name of the method we want to call when that happens. So here we might have our HTML where there's a button, and that button, when it's clicked, we want to call this OK method. Now, you might be looking at that and saying, okay, where's the v-on? V-on is the long syntax, just like v-bind was. But just like v-bind has a colon as a shortcut, v-on has the @ symbol as a shortcut. So this syntax is saying when this button is clicked, call a method on this page called OK. Now let's go into our demo and we'll add the click events for the cancel and save buttons. Notice our page, we have cancel and save down here. Right now they don't do anything other than just let us click them. When we click save, we want the hero model to be printed in JSON format down in this blue bar. And then we click cancel, we want to clear it out. So let's flip over to our code. And the first thing we have to do is find our buttons. There's the cancel button, and then there's our save button. Now we want to put the click event in here, so we can do @click, just like this. And we're going to call cancel hero. We have to have a place to put that cancel hero. So let's go down into our model, and then below data, we're going to do at the same level as data, this thing called methods. Now if you want to use a snippet, you can do v method right there, hit tab. It'll put the methods section in there, and then the first method is going to be called cancel hero. Now we said that when we cancel, we want to wipe out the message. So we'll do this dot message equals blank. And of course, that's what it is by default already. So while we're here, let's create the save hero method. And for this one, we want to set the message, because that's what's displayed in the blue bar, equal to the JSON stringify of the hero object, whatever the current value happens to be. We're not going to use a replacer for this function, but we are going to use for white space a new line character. And then we've got our save hero method. We got to bind that up to the click event of the other button right here, the save button. And again, we could do v-on colon click equals then the name of the function, or we could just replace v-on with the @ sign like this, which is the more conventional syntax. Now, one more thing. When we click on save, we want to put the message in there in JSON stringify. Well, the message should be inside of a pre-tag, so it can be formatted with those new line characters. So we'll surround it like that. Now we go over to our application, and we scroll down, and we click on the save button. You can see there's the entire values of the hero. We click cancel, it wipes them out. And now you know how to bind to HTML events. One last thing. You can actually put in parentheses right after here, and this will still work. So notice that the cancel hero on line 71 has no parentheses, and on line 78, save hero does have parentheses. We run this application, it's still working. Now, this is helpful because when you go back to the code, if you ever wanted to pass a value in here for a parameter, you could do that. Since we have no parameters, we're going to omit those parentheses. And this is a nice convenience. Next on our journey is to add two-way binding to our heroes component. So what's two-way binding? This is when we have a component like our heroes component and we want to display like a first name. So we display it from the model in an input, but then we also accept the input from the user to update the model. So how does that work? Imagine we have hero.firstname, it's shown in the input. Then the user types in and then it changes the model. So here we might have an input like this, and then we have v-model where we do our two-way data binding to the hero.firstname property in our model. Let's go apply this v-model now to different places in our application. Back in our application, we can see that we've got a first name, a last name, and a description. Notice the description is actually a text area. That's why I can drag it over here. Now let's flip over to our code and we'll find the first name in the model. Down below here, we can see first name, last name, and description. Remember, up top, we put the first name in the header. Now, if we go look for our first input here, we can see we've got first name right here. So now we can do v-model equals and do hero.firstname. Now, you might be tempted just to do first name. Now, that wouldn't work because the model is actually hero.firstname. Down in the last name, we're going to do v-model equals hero last name. Now, how do we do this for our text area? The same way we did the other two, actually. So here we'll do v-model equals and then hero.description. Now, when I go back over to the application, you can see there's Madeline, Papa, and the Cat Whisperer. And let's just change one of these values from Madeline to Ella. We can see the title changed up here. And if I press save, we can see the output down below shows the first name of Ella, Papa, the Cat Whisperer. If we change the Cat Whisperer to hello and press save down here, we can see that it works. So now we have two-way data binding simply by adding v-model. Now let's use what we've learned with vModel to do a binding to the radio buttons here for red, blue, green. Notice they don't work right now. And it should color in this line down below with the correct color. And also to do a checkbox binding. Then our hero can be either active or retired. Now let's flip over to our code and we'll look for the checkbox. Here's the checkbox for active, and notice it's not bound to anything yet. Let's go ahead and put vModel in here, and it was called Hero Active. Now if we flip back to the application, when we check this on or off and we press save down below, we see active is false, and we click it again. Now it's true. Well, that was easy. Let's go look for the radio buttons. Now notice there are 3 radio buttons in a group. So for these inputs, we're going to do vModel equals a hero cape color. And we'll just copy that and we'll paste that into all 3 of these labels. And there we go. So now on lines 42, 51, and then 60, we have our model set up for the radio button. For this div, we want to color it based upon whatever cape color they choose. So how can we do that? Well, we can use a little styling to do this. Now, normally we could create a CSS style like this here with the style property. But we learned earlier how we can do property binding with colon or v-bind. So let's try to do that with the cape color that they select. The way we bind a style is first we have to give it this object, and we want to change the background color. So I want to make the background color red, blue, or green based on what cape they choose. So what's going to happen here is the left-hand side is the style we're updating, and the right-hand side is the expression. So in this case, we're saying based upon the hero cape color, set the background color. So now the style is going to be set based on whatever this dynamic value is in our model right here on line 66. Now if we flip back to the application, as soon as we select green, we can see the color updates, or blue, or red. We press save down below. Now we can see the cape color is right down here. So we've just learned how to apply the vModel to radio buttons and checkboxes, and also how to use the vbind or the colon binding to a property like style. To complete the data binding on our heroes component, next we have to learn how we can bind to select boxes, but we're also going to learn how we can use key modifiers, a way that we can press a certain key and trap that event, and then also bind a specific CSS class to an element. So how does this work? Well, let's take a look at our heroes view component. And we're going to use key modifiers to bind to specific event scenarios, like when somebody presses the escape key or the enter key, and then also a class binding syntax. So imagine we have this HTML, because we do. And in our HTML, we've got the select box. Up here, notice we've got this keyup.esc. Now you might imagine that's binding to the keyup event, just like we did at click before. Here's at keyup. But the .esc is the key modifier. So it's not just on all keyups, it's only when the escape key is pressed. We could also do .enter, or we could use like 13 if we want to capture a specific ASCII event sequence. So what about the class binding? Over here we're using :class, which is the short syntax for the other option, which is v-bind class. And we tell it what class name do you want to display under what condition. So the left-hand side is the class name. It's called invalid. That's a CSS class that I want to apply only when it's not hero.power. So when hero.power is empty, it's going to show invalid. And that makes sense because if there's nothing selected in the select box, I'll show this invalid class. And that will style our select box a certain way. Now let's go apply these to our code and see how this works. Back in our code, we can go look for the select, and it's down here on line 73. First, we want to put in the vModel. We've done this several times now, so we just do vmodel hero power. If we scroll down to the model, we can see that's the name of this power right there. If we flip over to a running application, this select box should now work. So we'll select speed. If we scroll down and we press save, the power speed shows up. Flight, there we go. Now, when this is empty, we want it to be styled a certain way to show it's invalid. So let's refresh this page so it's empty again. Notice it says please select one. If I hit save, it's empty down here. I want to put a red line over on the left, and that invalid class will do it. So now if we go find the select box again, now we can do colon class, and we use that syntax again for an object. And the style that I want to put in is called invalid. And I only want that when there is no hero power. So when I save that and we flip back to our code, notice it's red right now because nothing's been selected. If I hit speed, it goes away. If I press save, again, you'll see the power down there. But what if I want to reset the superpower back to no selection? How do I do that? I can't select please select one. I want to be able to press the escape key in here and then have it automatically reset. So inside of the select, we're going to use key up, and on the escape sequence, I want to call a function called clear power. Now I'm not passing anything to it, so I'm just going to call clear power directly. We're going to come down to our methods. We'll create clear power, and we're simply going to do hero.power equals empty string. And there we go. So when I come back now, I can select speed, and when I hit the escape key on that box, it resets it. If I press save, you'll notice the power is blank. Now it doesn't work up here. It only works when I'm down there. So when I click on speed, now if I go inside of the description and hit escape, notice nothing's resetting. But if I'm inside here and I click flight and then hit escape, it will reset. That's because the key up modifier is working for us with the escape key. So now we've completed our form and all the bindings that we need it to have. So we've got our text bindings, our interpolation, our V models for all of our text boxes, text areas, our options, radios, and our checkboxes and selects. We've got our click bindings and even class and style bindings, as well as key modifiers.
Foam coming out of the
Congratulations, you've
manhole
just
near
built your
gate
first Heroes
E.
View component. You learned a
Yes,
bunch of different
it's
bindings along the
all
way.
covering the
Here's your
manhole and
top
it's about
tips
a
as a
foot
recap.
wide.
We use the double curly braces as interpolation for whenever we want to show text. And then when we want to bind to an event, we do at the name of the event, like at click or at key up. And we follow that with the name of the event we want to call inside of our methods. We want to bind to a property like href or source on an image tag, we do colon property. And then we follow that with the expression from the model that we use. And then finally, if we want two-way data binding in an input or a select, then we can do v-model. So in this module, we learned quite a few things. We learned how to display our data, let the users edit the data, change the UI based on it, and then also handle events from our users. Now we're ready to move on to the next section where you learn how to display lists and use conditional logic.
You might as well promote me to supervisor. You hold you. No, not yet. No, but I reached out to him. But this is now it's getting ridiculous. Compost, closed out, Cortez, there all the time. It's usually me giving them the pass on and together gets the message. And everything so that the team gets to do it, and then everything kind of falls back on what it's still doing. That's not fair on me. So like, it's you see that this is supervisor issues that you go to. Tell my supervisor yesterday was the day before when the sport is. Yeah, that incident with the boat that was made out of Portugal. That's why I'm like I'm confused. Like Cortez, you didn't pass that information down. Come on, and you know when you were talking, it happened at exactly 5:40 when I was playing. Yeah, around the time I was gonna get on Chuck the Leonardo, the allied guy, brings the uniform. He hits the contractor who has a rental dolly or something or whatever. And Cortez is sitting there looking at it. I'm like, "Yeah, dude, they're about to walk away. No one's gonna report this incident." And then obviously the other people are going to report it because insurance has to be filed. So I'm like, yo, I'm gonna go report it. I'm like, and then I tell Cortez everything, and then he only tells Ryan. This Ryan just doesn't tell me. Right? I'm like, dude, you're a supervisor. That's your job. So I'm tired of looking at that. Right? Usually, but I think you know, it's like someone the other day, someone's dream got stolen, and the only people they look at it. Clubbing I feel every day. Well, I'm trying to take this. I'm coming. Things. This is childish behavior. And then to sit back on everything, okay, the laptop is no consensus over it. This laptop am I supposed to use is just the laptop and the educational purpose. Yeah, I'm doing your laptop. That's no use for feature at this point. You can go on the camera and look at everybody who uses the laptop. So I'm trying to figure out what is the issue with the laptop so I know how to do it. But other than that, this is supervisor issue have to contact your supervisor. I'm doing everything as a regular security guard to pass down the information. If you want me to do more, promote me. That's it. And this is frustrating. So, on top of another job, I don't have time. And then even on my other job, I'm still choosing this one as my primary whenever the bozos don't want to come in on time. They want to just lollygag and come in late. Like I don't have other things to do, but because of allied law or whatever rules, I still have to lay over my work and my review. This is bogus, man. This is bogus. And all I'm being provided is a free platform for education. This is not worth it. So, try that I'm a great employee. I'm not getting this. It's not about where it's supposed to be. Yeah. It's like, yo, Fred, promote me or contact the supervisors. Because I brought up the point system. If on the point system the borrower is one and your new employee is the second one, how are you targeting me for everything that's occurring? Everything is when the pass down comes, it's a Lopez telling me that they don't put like tools are going over some pass down about me being more detailed about the information I'm already relaying. It's not me, it's the person that's relaying the information that's going to be detailed. You can look at everything, it's always fact checked. And it's not to say anything about you, even the whole refrigerator thing. They put it on me before even going on the activity log to see what happened. They just came in, oh yeah, we're gonna go on patrols again. Seems like he forgot the refrigerator. I didn't even get a chance to say anything. I had to contact Fred. and tell Fred because Lopez was like, oh yeah, that just shows how real of a rookie you are. Be like, oh yeah, Harvard and this is just gonna go over again. Like, yeah, dude, this is bogus. Because I know Lamar will genuinely make a mistake. And this is not me. Like we have a specific structure. We broke it down and always doing full courses and finishing it in 1 hour, sitting down 2 to 6. It was an issue. Now we chop it up 5, 7, 8. That's an issue now. Now we switch it up and add more variants. Now it's an issue. Fred, what's the issue? Inconsistent. But I know one good for everyone. This is fair across the board. This is not. It isn't. Lopez is sick. I'm not saying anything about it, but it's like, yo, the team has to be more conscious. It's like touching everything. Like come on, man. Like, everyone is coming from somewhere. Like, come on, man. This is stuff that has to have another job. I'm trying to go home and people are like to get them sick because other people are coming here sick. If you can't take care of yourself, stay home. Yeah, stay home. Give other people the hours. This is like truly unfair. Like, dude, like this one is gross and disgusting. You have cookies back there and other stuff back there. My stuff is back there. Like, come on, yo, Fred. This. I'm just waiting for it to play. I want to make sure that I'm receiving stuff because I. Starting it's even for schedule. Yeah. Broken. You went and manually broken it while taking care of everything in the front, while understanding what needs to be done at 6. Did all of that. Yeah. They don't. They do nothing at all. And then took West and I'd say we don't and perfect that they make mistakes. Uh, it's just we can mess up and then try to punish folks that have nothing to do with the incident. Right? Bad Jonas, I didn't even bring that up. It didn't even get done. They'll tell you which friend is he just cares about looking good. That's it. Oh yeah, no, that's why I told you one year the bus if you make a mistake, then that's why I'm talking to him because I know it's not Fred saying this, it's Tom Close and Lopez and everyone, but it's crazy. I bring a laptop, I sit down, it's stand there, I mean, I like to pick the two but that doesn't give you one or the perception of stuff or driving like that. I think we see it to the same, it's get used to this. Trip going no county, making million shit, and then the swing shit to look like you backed up and stuff that being good. It's not good. No, and then this bit is later, she's still learning. I don't know how. She's still in training. She come on, Fred. Come on. And then you hire someone else. So you're gonna have two supervisors again training someone else. Like Fred, come on. Come on, come on, come on. I'm not. That's why I got two jobs. For the first job, Siren is not Siren. The first job, I just need to make sure I understand the job already. So the artist don't be afraid of no one for 2 minutes. This artist that origin. Thank you. Well, when you struggling to stay awake and awake, right? So we've got to depend on something to yeah, keep us awake. As long as we're being attentive, right? I don't see a problem of going to a laptop or a phone, right? The part that's frustrating is the cameras don't even work or get the angles we need. We could just turn around and probably cover by just doing the 360. But the actual views we need to focus on the camera like Fred wants, they're all gone. One man down. That adds to everything. It was Cortez that told me security shifts for great guys have 3 people. Yeah, we were 3. So I'm like 3. Why we have 2? So they feel like we don't need it. Yeah, they come but swing shifts has 3 people. Yeah, Fred, I don't know, Fred. It's, takes, see, I don't know. I think that's not my position. I wouldn't want to be in Fred's position, but it seems like he has to. the terrible leader. Like when it comes to making the good decisions, it sucks to say it's my choice. I've led a lot of teams. Mm-hmm. Lead by example. That's just not people that texted me. Say, come on, Fred. Come on, Fred. And what angers me is one time Cortez said, yeah, I called off, and I know he goes, hey, Navarro, free to come into work tonight? I know that's exactly what happened. And I'm like, so Fred knows who to call when he needs his ass covered. Fred knows exactly who to call. So whenever you just get thrown under, like you said, whenever he just gets thrown under the bus, he just blames those people that covers his ass. Nah, Fred, that either you got no integrity or you really just like you misunderstanding what's going on. That is not a good representation of who you are. You don't bash the people that cover your behind when things could be way worse and you could be coming in. If he had came in that night when you came in, it would have been the whole household. The fridge fell, everything fell. He would have had a terrible night. And he would have been here from morning shift to see it. So I'm not, I don't know what to say to Fred anymore, man. Like, and it's not like I had anything to say, but what would be the one gonna say when people, oh, they're not doing their job too. I'm like, I don't want to get into a back and forth with him. Like, I would text it, get what you have to say, and now the barber was 100% right. This is a dead end job. This is some bullshit, though. This is some grade A BS. That does the job to its full capacity. All the other supervisors have to get told what they're doing wrong. Right, that's an issue with the team. That's not even regular security guards anymore. Talk about supervisors. Second level before we get to you. If one person out of the whole four is terrible, that's a 25% chance of having a success rate. 75% is going to be shit. That's what you're seeing now, right? So it's not like it's confusing. It's you have shit and you have 25% good. So yeah, maybe 1, 2 days out the week is gonna be good. Like it's been when you were here one day, and you like this is what I'm like, yo, how blind can you be now? This is the leadership part. The star player. Monday, Tuesday, he show up. And the rest of the week, the other players don't show up. You blame the star player who helped the teammate try to spread the word and be a good teammate to other people. Come on, man. No, no more. Fred is not here. If Fred was here as doing this enforcement, catching us on site like he's supposed to be. Okay, cool. Because after a certain point, when you keep getting messages, you can't go to sleep, Fred. We got to figure out what the issue is. Every day is a message. Every day is a message. I didn't see you one time come. And you're worried about pass down? Why would I pass down to someone who never shows up? This is a whole team issue. You can't put it on the person like you feel like is the issue. It's the whole team thing. Everybody needs to protect their job. Trump is in office. And you right now you wanna act like, oh, this team has just now been doing that. Oh, Fred, like come on. Get a grip, brother. Man, this is why I don't like working for people. It was my first experience. Just working and I'm grateful for it. I don't want to work for another. I'm tired. Ever since I got there in America, I started work when I was 16 in high school. McDonald's, everywhere. Tired. People are cheap. Like I don't know if it's the profession I'm in, they're too dumb. I don't like dumb people. I don't like to insult people, but like it feels like now I have to come on, Fred, or with your hand, come on, Fred. It's not. I don't. I'm not in the business of making you look dumb. I don't know. Yeah, I'm expecting normal shit. 10 to probably 11, anywhere from 10 to 11:30, 11:45. I'll start my first control, or you start your first control. And probably be hour and 45 minutes on the laptop. I know because I go live every day. It's an hour and 45 minutes or 2 hours between the next control. Go after you, or just in general. That whole day. And after, you know, break 30, 45 minutes. You want to take your hours, and I'm going to get a laptop and basically run the work on this every day. You can say 2 hours. If you want to say 2 hours and 30, I'll give you that break. On an 8 hour shift where you're doing nothing. So the other 6 hours, what am I doing? Go to get the camera. You're probably on tour, probably doing some documentation, or probably waiting for the rest of them. Because all that I'm doing is writing on the It's not 2 o'clock, and getting stuff late. Uh, that's why it's frustrating. Mess it up the flow. What are we doing now? Like now if someone falls asleep, Frankie, even be cooking. It's fast on this, they hope that's you didn't sound like that's what I said. So, it's all pretty incredible. I don't know my routes. And that's why I brought up the point metric on the English app. How do I know anything? How do I know my routes? And since I started, every day I've gotten all the posts complete. Whatever post you send me on, 100%. Better than the only supervisor I'm not better than is the ball. And that's a point system showing you all the workflow that goes on throughout the facility. So at what point do you listen to Lopez saying, "Oh, he doesn't know his complete routes"? How does that make sense? Go through the activity log the same way you guys do with everyone else, and then you see, oh no, he knows his routes. He knows his routes. How about you teach me something on the computer? The only thing I don't know, because that's supervisor level. So okay, well everything else, Lopez to pass down, but Gary doesn't pass anything down. I don't pass passing it down like he's not he's like his supervisor buddies. And then on top of that, he does that when Fred has someone to see. Other than that, you're the only person I would say good afternoon and take care. Good. It is here. I've been known for volunteers at the people. Sure, I get it. Because if you, I would want to do, but I just hold it in, and I'm like, this doesn't like, yo, it doesn't look like the Bible. Sometimes the black moves to have the hand. And I'm like, kicking that up, and I'm like, maybe I should change it up. Be a nice guy.
One of the most common things that you'll want to do with an application is display a list. It could be a list of search results, for example, or even a master detail. And not far behind that is the ability to show content conditionally based upon some expression. In this section, we're going to learn how to do that. This topic is all about lists and conditionals, and it's good to start out with some questions that we can answer. First, how do we display lists in the first place? We'll also answer how we can add content to the DOM when we need to. And there's a difference between adding content to the DOM and also hiding and showing content that's already in the DOM. We'll explore both of these avenues and when you choose one over the other. Now let's dive in. Our application so far only has a single hero. In this section, we're going to learn how we can render a list of heroes. First, to render a list, we need to know a couple of basic things about how Vue works. We're going to use a directive called the v-for. The v-for directive lets us iterate over a model, maybe a list of heroes, for example, and then we take each one of those heroes and then we stamp out a template in our content. So it repeats that HTML content for every one of the items in our list or array. Now, one real good tip here is that we want to make sure that this is as fast as possible because there's going to be a lot of data on the screen if it's a big list. So we want to use this key binding for faster rendering, and we'll put a unique value in that key. Let's take a closer look here. So in our heroes view, we might have a UL with an LI, and each LI we want to be repeated for every hero. So if we zoom in on the v-for, that is our view directive. On the right-hand side of that expression is heroes. That's an array. And then what we do is we iterate through all the items in heroes, and we give it a variable, hero. So the hero variable is an iterator that loops through and represents every item in the heroes array. And then there's a unique identifier for each hero called hero.id, and we'll bind that to the key. That'll help us out so Vue can swap values in and out of each row as they change or if they change. It's basically a way for Vue to identify each row uniquely. Now let's go do this together. We'll open up the code and go to the folder called 04 lists and conditionals. And you'll see a begin and an end in here. We're going to start at begin and then open up Vue heroes. This is the pattern we're going to do throughout the course. And from here, we're going to right click and choose open in terminal. Now we're going to run npm install or just npmi. This will install all the packages for Vue that we need. And while it's working on this, we can open up the folder and see what's inside. Here you can see the very familiar structure we've had before. And then in the source folder under components, we have a heroes Vue component. Now we'll close down the terminal just so we can see what's going on here. And we'll make some more space. Here we can see the array of heroes that's in our data model. I'll minimize this for a second so we can see all the heroes are in one variable here in the data. So right inside the data property, that's our function that returns out our model. We've got our selected hero and our heroes. And we'll modify some of this as we go. So we want to display all those heroes. Next, up inside of our HTML, we can see we've got content here. And a lot of this was from when we wanted to display a single hero. So we want to modify this to show a heroes list. Notice on line 9. Before we do that though, let's go back into our terminal and let's run npm run serve. This is going to build the app and it'll show us what we have to start out. Now we'll open this up by clicking on the link and there is our heroes app. Notice we have a heroes list header, but there's no heroes list showing yet. And then down below, this is where the details for each hero should display. By the end of this module, we're going to have a list of heroes up top. We'll allow the user to select a hero, and that'll show the hero in the hero's details at the bottom. Flipping back to the code, let's make this happen. We'll keep the app running too. We just learned about the v-for, so let's go to the end of the header here, and we're going to create a UL that has an LI. Now I'm using a little bit of Emmet here to show me how to do that, and then hitting tab. Now we're going to give it a little bit of class styling up here. We're using Bulma for styling, and it just makes it easy to do this, where we can create a list that's formatted nicely. We'll also give it this class of isHoverable. Makes it easy to select an item. Then inside the list, we're going to have this LI item. Now each LI item is going to display the hero. So everything inside of there will be stamped out for all of our heroes. We have 4 in ours. Now I'm going to do v-4 equals, and then 2 quotes. What goes in here again is hero in heroes. Now notice, and I'll delete heroes real quick to show you, as I typed heroes, it's actually showing me the model value that's down below in our data. That's pretty cool. So we can just start typing in and hit tab. It'll fill it in for us. After we do that, we can then do key, :key like this, and now we can do hero.id. So what goes inside of our LI? Well, that's up to us. I'm going to create a selectable item with an anchor tag, and we'll give it a couple classes again just to make sure it is looking the way we want it to. Because we're using Bulma, the class will be list item. And then inside of that anchor tag, we're going to create a span. And the span is going to use some things we've already learned to do hero first name with interpolation. Now once we have that, let's look at what we've just added. This UL from line 11 down through line 17. It's a list, and it's going to iterate over every one of the heroes. There should be 4 of those LIs when we're done, and it should display each hero's first name. Now if we go back to our app, we should see our list right here. And notice there's a little bit of hovering with the class. That's what Bulma's doing. But when we click on things, nothing's happening yet. We'll work on that soon too. Flipping back to the code, we can again see on line 12, that's where the power of this is. The v-for shows that we have a hero item in the array. And then if we go down to our data, we can see there's our heroes, and there are the 4 heroes that we're showing. And that's how we use the v-for. Our next step is we want to be able to select the hero, and then when we select it, to indicate that it's selected, and then also show that hero down below in the details. We'll flip over to our code, and we'll take a look at what's going on here. First, notice we have a selected hero item down here. We'll keep that in there. That's just a default for now. But also up inside the v-for, we need to allow selecting. So inside of this anchor, We'll first create a click like this. What we want to do is set the selected hero equal to the hero that's in this row. Now let's flip back to the application, and when we select this, we can see it's now changing and everything seems to be working. A couple things we want to do though. First, we're not really highlighting the row after we're done, like we don't see which one is highlighted up here. Let's go fix that with some CSS. So even though we already have a class already bound on line 13, we can use another class binding to optionally add and remove a class if it's been selected. So inside of here, we're going to add a class, which we have defined in our CSS called isActive. We want to set that to true whenever the selected hero happens to equal the hero on the current row. Now if we flip back over and we select Madeline, we can see Madeline stays selected, or Landon, or Haley. Okay, one last thing we have to do is down here we have a default selected hero. We really don't want that. So what do we set it to? I like to set it to undefined. That way it's not defined at start at all, and then we can select it when we need to. We flip back to our app, we notice the app is broken. Now, I knew this would happen here. Let's open up the debugger to show you what happens. In the developer tools, which you can open up with F12 or Command Option I on a Mac, if we go to the top, we can see cannot read the property first name of undefined. Let's go find out what that means. Flipping back to the code, we have a first name of undefined. So first name is the name of the person it's trying to bind to. Undefined happens to be selected hero. That's because we get to the top of our code up here. Right below that list, there's the details. It's trying to render selected hero first name. Well, selected hero is undefined when it starts up. Therefore, it's first name of undefined. So we have a couple options. One of those is that we can put back the selected hero down here, which I don't recommend because in a real app, you probably won't want to do that. You could, or you might think you could do an empty object. That's not going to do what you think either, though. So when we start rendering now, we can see the list is there and the data is kind of broken down below. That's really not what we want because it's an object, yes, but there's no first name property. So we want to keep the undefined here. In the next video clip, we'll learn how to handle this exact scenario. The scenario that we just saw, where we have content where it can't render because it doesn't know what the object is quite common. In fact, a lot of times you're going to run into scenarios where you need to add or remove content based upon an expression. That's what we're going to explore here. The way this works is by using conditionals. Conditionals allow us to display content based upon an expression. We'd like to add or remove the content from the DOM based upon this expression. To do that, we use this VIF directive. So we set the VIF directive inside of our component equal to some value, like selected hero. And if there is a selected hero, it'll show the value inside of the div in this case. So if there's a selected hero, we see uSelected, selected hero.firstName could be Ella, Landon, whoever. If there is no selected hero, the code inside of that div is never executed and isn't added to the DOM either. That's exactly what we want in this situation. So let's go flip over to our code and make this happen. Here we have our selected hero is undefined. Now we go back up to the top of our code and we can see this section here on line 23 is where all of our details begin. We don't even want to render any of this section if there is no selected hero. So we're going to put a VIF in here and bind it to selected hero. Now remember, when selected hero starts up, it is undefined, so it shouldn't show it at all. Now let's flip back over to the running app and we can see here is our heroes and we can hover over them. We'll select Ella. Now Ella is showing up below and it still works when we change them. But when we first start, which we can do by refreshing here, nobody selected and nothing shows up below. And just to prove this, and I encourage you to do this as well, open the developer tools and you should see no error messages here on startup. What's actually happening here, if we right click on this content and we choose inspect, we can see down here, there's Madeline. And I'm going to get rid of the console just to give you more room. So here's the Madeline details. Now watch what happens when we refresh. When we refresh, there is a header up here. I'm going to use this icon right there to select an element in the page. There's our hero list. You can see all the contents inside the header, and that's the list itself. notice there's nothing below the list. That's this weird comment down here. As soon as I add Landon, notice right here, down at the bottom inside of the DOM, you can see this entire
Well, it
div got
looks like
added.
I'm the one that's
So
chilling
VF is
with.
literally adding content
He's
to the
doing.
DOM
It looks like he's
when
no
the
longer
expression
a
is
camera,
true.
but he's
And
like
when it's not true, or it's
the one
falsy,
that's the supervisor.
anything that doesn't evaluate to true,
That's what I'm.
like
That's
a
the
false
supervisor. It's
value,
not for me
empty
to point
string,
out to
or
Fred and tell
undefined in
him
this
what he's
case,
doing.
that content isn't
I'm.
even in the DOM. And that's how we add
That's.
and remove content from
I'm.
the DOM.
Now I'm feeling influence.
There will be times where you want to keep the active HTML elements on the page and just hide or show them. That's what we'll do in this section. Showing and hiding means that we have HTML on the page and then we want to either show or hide it. It doesn't remove it from the DOM, and to do this we use the vShow directive. We set that to an expression, and if it's truthy or falsy, well, things will either show or be hidden. Looking at how this could work inside of a component, we could say inside of a div vShow selected hero. If there is a selected hero, it'll show you selected a hero, the text. If not, you wouldn't see that. In that case, it would set the style to display none. That's the key here with the vShow. Now you have to be careful with the vShow because if you used a vShow like this down here, it would evaluate the content in the div whether or not there was a selected hero or not. So in this case, you'd actually be evaluating selected hero.firstname, which could be undefined. Even though it's not displayed, you still might have an error in the page. So it's not ideal to use the vShow for things where you're needing to not evaluate what's inside of those expressions. Let's take a look at how we can use the vShow in our application. Here's our app, and remember that we're using a vIf to show the content at the bottom of the page. So we refresh, and the vIf will then render the content for the details when we select somebody. Now let's flip to our code. We go find our vIf, and instead let's change that to a vShow. Now it's still an expression here on line 23, but when we go back to our app and we refresh, notice we have nothing on the page. We open up our developer tools, and for now I'm going to hit the three dots on the far right, hit three dots, and I'm going to show the tools on the right just so we have a little more real estate. And then I'm going to click on that two errors. It opens up the console, and we can see here first name of undefined. We've seen that problem before. This is why we don't use a vShow for the selected hero. Put our vIf back in, and then we refresh the page, and we can see we have no errors. So how do we use the vShow? Well, that's a good question. Going back to the app itself, notice we have an ID, first name, last, and description. Let's just show how we can use the vShow in here. We're going to add a checkbox on the page, which we learned how to do previously in this course. We're going to do it right below the first name, and when you check it, it'll hide the last name and description. Flipping back to the code, we then go search for our first name field right there, and between that and the last name field, we're going to put another field in place. So I'm going to use Emmet again to show how we can create a div that's a type field. And now we're going to get a label for this checkbox that we want to create. We're going to give it a class of checkbox. And then we're going to point this to an element called show for show more. Now in this label, we'll say show more. Then we're going to create an input. And the type of this one's going to be a checkbox. We'll set the class equal to isPrimary. That's a Bulma class to style it for us. We'll give it an ID of show. This is so it'll match the label. And then we're going to bind it to a property, which doesn't exist yet, called show more. When we're done, we just have a checkbox right here, and it's bound to a property called show more. Now if we scroll down to our data, we'll create the show more property with a default value of false. Now if we flip back over to our page and we refresh, you can see that we have our show more, and right now nothing's happening. We want to basically bind the vShows to the last name and description. So we'll go back to the code. If we come back up here, we can see there's our checkbox. We now want to take this entire field for the last name and say, okay, vShow equals show more. We'll copy that, and we'll come down to the field for the description, do the same thing. Now we go back to our app, we'll refresh, we'll choose Haley. Notice it's not showing anything because show more is false. When we add that here, it's being shown, so we can then hide and show the content. Now notice when I go into the tools over here, we can select on the input selector, and I'm going to choose the background here of the last name, and we should be able to see there's our element. Notice we've got this last name right here, and there's the field for it. Watch what happens when I click on the show more on the left. Over on the right hand side, the DOM stayed the same, but now we have a style of display none for both of the last name and the description. And click on that back again, you can see the styles of display number removed. And this is how we use the vShow directive inside of Vue to hide and show active content in the DOM.
So much target people in the morning, you put a third person overnight, so that doesn't get someone tardy or running late.
Here are the key elements of what we learned about lists and conditionals. First, the vIf directive. This can be used to conditionally add or remove content from the DOM. I like using these for things like master details. And that's because inside the details, we're often referring to the thing that we have the vIf bound to, like the selected hero. We can also use the vShow to conditionally hide or show the content in the DOM. This is great when we want to leave the DOM alone and just quickly display or hide it. The v-for is used a lot inside of applications. We're going to iterate over lists and repeat the template over and over again for ULs and LIs, or just over a set of divs, or even inside of a table. And then when we use the v-for, we want to use the colon key to identify that unique value. Here's putting it all together. We might have a hero with master details. Here we have a UL with an LI. Then we've got a data model over here on the right. In this case, we have our selected hero, and we've got a list of heroes. When we click, we can set the selected hero, which is no longer undefined at that time, and then the vIf will see that it's got a value, it's truthy, and then that div at the bottom will be rendered. So in this module, we learned how to display lists, add and remove content to and from the DOM, and we also learned how to show and hide content with the DOM with the v-for, the vIf, and the vShow. Oh, okay. Where did you know this? That's how we do too. That's how we did both the universe. I feel like I only know when I get the experience when the time arises that I needed to perform the facts. That's how I learned doing it. So it's got my money. Can't just pop up fantastic or something.
friends is starting to get into the hobby of shooting. Yeah. Just a few months ago, he bought his first gun. Really? Yeah. So it was pretty nice at the written shooting. But he's not very straight. Online, the team where you be friends with someone. What I don't know how good it is. It might be accidentally shooting the range. And this is an accidental.